right, good evening, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. We are live and ready to go. This evening, we're going to be continuing on with our answer series. And tonight, if you got your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Genesis chapter number 29 again. You taking notes, Zoe? Zoe's taking notes. She's watching you guys, so make sure you're doing the right thing or else she's going to write you up. She's got a pen and paper. She's ready to go. All right. All right. We're going to be in Genesis chapter number 29. So while you're flipping over there, just a reminder, our memory verse comes to us from Proverbs chapter number 3, verses 5 and 6. It says this: "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." Amen. Tonight we're going to be looking at the answer to this question right here. How is the gospel part of reconciling relationships? Reconciling relationships. That's what we're going to be digging in tonight. Now, we've been following the account of Jacob for several weeks now. And so Jacob had lived up to his name, deceiving both his brother and his father, and stealing the birthright and blessing that belonged to Esau. And so we're following Jacob and not Esau because Jacob was the one who received the promise given to his father and grandfather. And so it is Jacob through whom the seed will come that will bless all nations, through that promise there. So we know that all of this was done to fulfill God's promise that the older would serve the younger. But all of the deception created a rift in the family. And of course, Jacob fled Haran, where he experienced the deception of his uncle Laban. And when we left off last, Jacob had served Laban for 14 years just for the privilege of marrying Leah and Rachel. Really? He wanted to just marry Rachel, right? So we looked at the birth of the sons and one daughter of Jacob last week. We kind of did an overview there. So these sons would form the 12 tribes of Israel. So one of our goals today is to understand how Jacob became Israel. Then we're going to look at how Jacob and Esau were reconciled one to another. So Genesis chapter 29, we need to start with a little bit of an overview here real quick. So we looked at the birth of the sons in chapter 29, verses 31 through Genesis chapter 29, verse 31 to chapter 31. Benjamin came along later. And so after the birth of Joseph to Rachel, Jacob appealed to Laban to return to Canaan with his family in chapter 30. Laban refused and made another deal with Jacob over a period of 6 more years. So Jacob tended the flocks and God prospered all that he did. So the portion of the flock would be given to Jacob expanded, while Laban's portion was less. So this created a strife within Laban's sons, who were obviously jealous of Jacob. So there's kind of a lot of overview here. We're not really going to read a lot of this stuff tonight. I would definitely encourage you to go home and read these chapters if it's been a while since you checked these ones out. But there's a lot of stuff going on, and so for the sake of time, we're just going to kind of run through some of these. So fast forwarding then to Genesis chapter 31, you'll see that God called Jacob to return to Canaan, telling him he would be with him. So this was done in a dream, and we already looked at some of this, but in verses 11 through 13, we see that Jacob recognized that God had blessed him by transferring Laban's wealth to Jacob. And while Laban was away shearing his sheep, Jacob gathered his wives, his family, his servants, and all of his possessions to head south to Canaan. So after that, Laban pursued them and confronted Jacob in the hills of Gilead. That would be near the Sea of Galilee, and asked him why he had left secretly and stolen his household goods. Now, Jacob didn't know this at the time, but Rachel had stolen idols. And she even lied to her father to avoid the consequences, which would have meant her death. But Jacob and Laban made a covenant, and Laban and his men returned to Haran. So I hope you take time this week to kind of read through chapters 30, 31, kind of understand these events right here. Like I said, we're kind of going a little bit broad here on some of this stuff, just to get to the lesson tonight that we want to focus in on. So with that brings us to Genesis chapter 32. So go ahead and flip over there. If you're not in chapter 32 yet, go ahead and flip over to chapter 32. And we're going to start reading these verses here. We're going to actually read verses 1 through 21. So Genesis chapter number 32, verses 1 through 21. Give me a second here. All right. All right, let's go ahead and begin there. Genesis chapter 32, verse 1 says, "And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he had said, 'This is God's host.' And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, 'Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau, thy servant Jacob said thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now.'" Now, just pausing here real quick, just to get everybody up to speed here. We know that Jacob, he wronged his brother Esau, right? And he took off running. Because what's the best thing to do when you have a problem? Turn around and run from it, right? That seems to be our go-to reaction anyways. Try to run away from our problems. Of course, that never works out. But we often try to do that anyways. And Jacob, of course, tried to do exactly that. Always trying to run away from his problems. And with Laban, it was the same thing. He tried to take off. What we didn't read is Jacob already made peace with everything with Laban. So all that's good. But he still has to deal with his older brother, the one that said he was going to kill him. And he probably would have. Remember, his older brother, he's the hunter. He's the tough guy. He's the one you don't want to mess with, right? So Jacob obviously fears his older brother. And since he left, he knows he's in trouble with his brother. So he has this fear. It's built up. He's got it in his head. So that's why he uses words like thy servant Jacob. Right? That's why he uses these words. He's trying to almost sweet talk. Send somebody else to sweet talk my older brother, right? So, thy servant Jacob, is what he says there in verse 4, saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Pause right there. You know that Jacob has got to be trembling right now, right? You know this guy's got to be scared to death. Listen, he just wronged his older brother, and if his older brother wasn't scary enough, he's bringing all these men with him. Can you imagine 400 men coming with him? Yeah, I don't know about you, but if I was Jacob right now, I'd be like, you know what, cancel everything, abort, I'm getting out of Dodge, right? We're going to take off and running. Verse 7. Jacob, no surprise to any of us, he was afraid. It says this, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. I would say rightfully so. And he divided the people that was with him. Listen, this is what fear does. Fear always divides, period, right? There's a lesson in there. There's a sermon in there somewhere. Fear always divides. However, was afraid of what was going to happen, so he tried to do the smart thing, and he tried to divide his people that was with him, and the flocks and the herds and camels into two bands. Verse 8 says this, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. You see how smart Jacob is. He's super smart. He thought ahead here. He said, you know what? Half of us may die, but maybe the other half will live, right? Verse 9, and Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God which said unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. All right? Listen, the next two words are really crucial. What happened? He messed up. He's on the run again. He's scared to death. He dug himself into a hole, right? So what is it that we all do when we try to run and we find out that running from our problems doesn't work? Suddenly, then it dawns on us. Now's a good time to talk to God. You know, I've been ignoring him this entire time because I'm too busy running from my problem. I don't have time to bring it to God, right? Too busy running from my problems. Now he dug himself in a corner. Now, look at the next two words. What are they? Deliver me. Deliver me. Please, Lord, deliver me. You said you would. Please do it. Because I dug myself in a hole. Now, if you want to see amazing works of God, now listen, everything that Jacob did, he did not deserve to be delivered here, right? We can all agree on that. But yet God is so faithful that in spite of sin, in spite of the deception, in spite of everything that had taken place, God is still faithful to his promise. Now, isn't that exciting? Isn't that good to know that no matter what happens, God is always faithful to our promise? That right there, man, that message right there, that ought to get any old Baptist preacher excited thinking about it, right? God is faithful even in spite of our sins and our struggles and our trials and our tribulations. That's why we can sing that song, Blessed Assurance. I have assurance. My assurance is not in my actions. My assurance is in the actions of Jesus Christ and what he had done for me. Let's read on. Look at this. Deliver me, I pray thee. We're in verse 7. From the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. Look at verse 12. And thou saidest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. And he lodged there that same night, and took that which came to his hand, a present for Esau his brother, right? If running doesn't work, if trying to appease him with a servant doesn't work, if praying to God doesn't work, maybe I can bribe him with a present. You see, you can feel how desperate he is here. It says this, verse 14. This is the present. 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. Verse 16, and he delivered them into the hands of his servants, every drove themselves, and said unto his servants, pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. So what does that mean? He is lining them up. You know what? These prizes, they just keep getting better and better and better, and eventually Esau, he's going to be happy with me, and he's going to leave me alone, right? Man, I'll tell you, this is some preaching here, and some good lessons for us today. Verse 17, and commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold also, he is behind us. Verse 19, and so commanded he the second and third, and all that followed the drove, saying, on this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, behold, us. For he said, I will appease him with the presence that goeth before me, and afterwards I will see his face, peradventure. Remember, that means what if? He will accept of me. For him and himself, and lodged that night in the company. There is a lot to read here, but we're going to pause right there right now. So let's look at some questions here, all right? Let's look at the text that we just read so far. Reminder here, we talked about this before, but how old were Jacob and Esau at this point? Now, since they were 77 when Jacob left, it had been 20 years, so this means that they're both about 97 years old at this point. We don't really think about that when we read the text, but we're talking about these, today we'd be like, man, these guys are pretty old now, right? And they're still feuding? Yeah, anybody that deals with family, you guys know families can hold a grudge, right? There is no doubt about that. I don't think I can preach to the choir by sharing that. But families can definitely hold a grudge. And we see that what happens with problems over time, they tend not to get better. They tend not to go away. Instead, they tend to get worse. And now we see the chickens are coming home to roost, right? And we see this is going to be a problem for Jacob. So how did God reassure Jacob as he neared Canaan? God actually sent his angels to meet Jacob at a place. And that's the place where Jacob named it Mahanaim. So what was Jacob's first step to reconcile with Esau? The first thing that he wanted to do was send messengers to Esau. And so he sent them south from Gilead to Seir or Edom. And so this is the region to the southeast of the Dead Sea. So we've heard of Edom before. When Jacob stole the birthright, the red stew was connected to Esau and the name Edom back there in chapter 25, verse 20. So Seir seems to be used as the regional name, while Edom is the national name, the Edomites. So Jacob sent a message to Esau. He basically told him where he had been, how he had prospered, and sought to be reconciled, to find favor in Esau's sight, right? So he's trying to, try to reconnect here. After all these times, you remember there was that thing that I did to you, and then I ran away? Well, since then, right, look at all those wonderful things that have happened. Aren't you proud? Aren't you glad that your brother has had this wonderful things? So we see that Jacob mentioned his wealth in light of the circumstances of his departure. He seemed to be reassuring Esau that he wasn't coming to take anything else. That was kind of the point there. So we see that Esau sent a message back saying that he was coming to meet him with 400 men. Trouble is coming, right? So Jacob received the message. He was afraid. He was distressed. Apparently, Esau did not make his intentions known at the time to the messengers. Now, reading ahead, you know what Esau was up to, and you know what he was doing. Really, can you blame Esau? I wouldn't have said anything either, right? Make him be scared for a minute. So anyways, he was obviously greatly afraid, and so he came up with all of these fix-it plans, right? Only one of those was to cry out to God, but we know he had all kinds of fix-it plans that he tried to put in place. And as we will see, the same thing is true for us today. Oftentimes, when God gives us direction, he gives us guidance, he calls us to a ministry or to do a certain thing, we're going to face roadblocks, we're going to face issues, we're going to face things like this. Sometimes what we like to do is, instead of just being faithful to what's true and letting everything work out, right? That's what James tells us. It's for perfection, working that perfect patience, right? We see these trials and tribulations and things. We see them kind of as a bad thing, and we try to get rid of them real quick, and so we adopt fix-it plans. And what we see is fix-it plans, it's futile. We shouldn't be adopting fix-it plans, because if God really called us to that, he's going to work it out. He's going to work out the details. He's going to get stuff cleared up. He's going to take care of business. And so what happens is oftentimes we lack our faith in that God's going to take care of it, because we have a way that we want to take care of it, and so we try to act on that. And that's something we need to watch out for. It's very easy to do today, right? So anyways, Jacob tried to appease Esau, and as you can imagine, Jacob was stressed out about his brother approaching here. Esau and his men were probably not far behind the messengers, and Jacob believed Esau still wanted to kill him. I mean, that was literally the last message, right, after all these years. And so he decided to split everybody up. So maybe half of us will be able to live. That's his outlook here. God promised that he was going to prosper, and he had so much faith that God was going to remain true that he thought half of them were going to die, right? You see, it's easy to pick apart this stuff because we get to read about the whole story, but we know that this kind of stuff happens in our lives too. Struggle with faith. So let's read on here. Let's look at verses 22 down to verse 32. Let's read on. It says this. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. Jacob was left alone, and there something amazing happened. What does this say here? There wrestled with a man with him until the breaking of the day. Verse 25, and when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. Dawn is coming, right? Look at this. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. Verse 28. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and has prevailed. Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. Reading on verse 30. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, and stay. The hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. All right, what in the world is going on here? So we see that Jacob, he isolated himself to start off with. He isolated himself from everybody. He sent his family across Jabbok, and he stayed there alone on the other side. So we see something interesting about this wrestling match that began. It's so true that oftentimes when we do battles, even when we try to fight God on things, we don't really, oftentimes we don't really build up to it. Sometimes it's just kind of sudden. God will tell us to do something, and we're just not ready for it, or we just, tell ourselves we're not ready for it anyways, and we'll tell them no, and we'll try to wrestle with different things. But this physical wrestling match, it was no different here. We're not told the exact details, but what we see here is this just kind of broke out suddenly. We see this wrestling match going on here. And so this continued all night long until daybreak. And so we see that neither man prevailed. So the man touched his hip socket, and his hip was dislocated. That's some pretty brutal stuff there. I don't know about you guys. I know my dad had a replacement hip therapy one time, and that's something that'll mess you up. That'll mess you up. So we know that this is obviously some serious stuff here. So what did the man ask of Jacob? He asked him to release him since it was almost night, or almost light. And Jacob obviously would not do it unless if he would get a blessing from him. Jacob and these blessings, right? He's always in pursuit of a blessing. So what did the man ask? Why did the man ask Jacob's name? It seems that he was asking Jacob to acknowledge that his name had not been fitting, but it would now be changed. So his name was changed to Israel, which means he has striven with God. He would no longer be known as the deceiver, but instead connected to God. So Jacob is trying to ask this guy his name, and of course he does not answer him. So let's see what all we can learn from this. So who was the man that Jacob wrestled with? Well, since Jacob concluded that he had seen God face to face, this man must have been God. And as we discussed previously, these appearances of God were the pre-incarnate Son of God presented to man as man, right? So we see these studies of Christophanies. We see these studies of Jesus appearing in the Old Testament with all these different times. So this was a wrestling match here. And what's interesting is this man wrestling with Jacob, he was really concerned when the light started to come up, it seems like, right? Okay, the fun's over, now I have to go. Now why is that? It kind of confirms that the man was God because he did not want Jacob to see his face clearly in the light. That's what we see. So let's kind of look real quick at Hosea chapter 12. You don't have to flip there if you don't want to. I'm going to read verses 3 through 4. Hosea chapter 12, verse 3 through 4 says this. He took his brotherly by the heel, and by his strength he had power with who? With God. Yea, power over the age. Bethel, and there he spake with us. So we get some insight from Hosea. This confirms that this man was indeed God that Jacob truly wrestled with. Jacob can say that he actually wrestled with God. Now, isn't that amazing? Don't get this confused here, because obviously everything is created because God spoke it into existence, right? That's what universe means. Verse meaning spoken, una meaning one. One spoken sentence. God everything. And of course, so we're not saying that Jacob or Israel here is as strong as God, but God definitely, and we see that Jesus wrestled with this man, and it was a point for Jacob. It was a point for him to grow. This was a turning point in his life for him to see, hey, you are no longer connected with who you used to be. You are now a new person. You are no longer the deceiver that you used to be. Now you have a connection with God. Do we see a picture of something like that today? Right? You are no longer that old creature that you used to be. Of course, that's a picture of salvation for us, right? We see oftentimes today Christians try to hold, we try to hold Christians' past against them. And that's one of the things that as Christians we should strive not to do, right? Especially when we're talking about pre-conversion, or if you're outside of God, outside of Christ's plans, things like that. The last thing that we should be doing is holding these sins, pointing and holding them against Christians. Right? Well, there was a time when you were just a drunk. Okay. Am I that man now? Right? We can use all these different things. The preacher that I grew up in, when I grew up at Alliance Baptist Temple, my family was there, and Reverend Oney, he was the pastor there. And that was part of his testimony. He was a drunk that stumbled into a revival one day. And he became saved, and man, he just got on fire for God, and the amount of lives that he changed. But that's part of his story. He was an old drunkard. He liked to go in the bars. He liked to brawl. He liked to fight. That's part of his story. That's who he used to be. His life changed. He wasn't that anymore. And so what do we get from this? The important part is if Jesus really did, we believe that Jesus did forgive us of all of our sins. Why is it that when we proclaim that we're Christ-like, why is it that we like to dig up people's past sins and use it against them? We do that quite a bit today. There's a lot of that. And of course, I don't want to get into too much there. Obviously, you want to keep each other accountable. That's one of the things that we should be doing. We should be keeping each other accountable, but that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is holding previous sin against somebody, right? That is another issue altogether. Jacob here, he was the deceiver. He did a lot of bad things and made a lot of mistakes. But aren't you just so glad that he got a whole another opportunity here, just like what we do? We can make all of our mistakes. We have sin in our lives. We all struggle with this. I know I certainly do. But God does not hold that against me. Thank God that he will not hold that against me on Judgment Day. In fact, he's not even going to bring it up, right? It's going to be forgotten, completely cleansed, blotted out, because I'm going to be justified just as though I never sinned. As Christians, we need to adopt a little bit more of that, but that's a different sermon, isn't it? So we see that Jacob, he called this place place of God. So the name is fitting to his experience. He literally wrestled with God. God gave him a challenge that was made specifically for him. And so he did. He wrestled with him all night long. And we see Jacob, he walked away with an injury, but he walked away a new man. And so it's just amazing to see that. So how should we understand Jacob's statement when he says he saw God face to face and yet lived? This may be a phrase that just indicates closeness, or it could be taken in a literal sense. In other places in the Bible, we read that no man can see the face of God and live. We discussed this before. A couple weeks ago, we were talking in the book of James, where James tells us to draw nigh to God. Right? Many times in the Old Testament, there were people that were told, stop, don't get any closer. Right? Do not draw nigh. Do not get any closer. Don't take another step. Right? When Moses is receiving the Ten Commandments, that's when all the people around, even the priests, they had to do something special, right? Otherwise, God was going to come upon them. They would have been struck dead, right? There was different requirements there. You don't just go walk up to a holy, perfect, and righteous God and expect to get away with it, right? Especially when we're covered in our sin. We see that this was a very special occasion here, something unique, something that has never happened before. So God told Jacob that his name change reflected how he had struggled with God and men. And so, of course, as a deceiver, he had created conflict with his wives, and all of that was about to change. So he did leave with a limp and a new name. So did he receive the blessing that he asked for? Yes. In verse 29, there was a blessing, though we do not know the content of it. So, Jacob had been through a lot. Much of the hardship in his life came as a result of his own sinful actions. Just the same could be said for us today. But some came through the sins of others. So God called Jacob to return to Canaan, promising to keep him safe as he went. He had left 20 years earlier as a single man with no possessions and was returning as a wealthy man with 4 wives, 11 children, and a host of servants and flocks. That's how much his life has changed over that course of 20 years. By the way, he's 97 years old now, right? How many people today, you get up there, you'd say you're about 77 years old, say, you know what, I'm done. 80 years old, you say, I'm done. Look at this. Aren't you glad that God wasn't done with them? Aren't you glad that God wasn't done with Jacob and he wasn't done with Esau? Through this blessing and because he was not done with them, the whole earth got to be blessed. Think about that. So Jacob was returning to his homeland, a changed man. God had blessed him, guided him, and changed him. And the promise made to Abraham was still in effect and was going to happen through this man and his family. So the twins end up reuniting. This is the part that we've been waiting for all night long. I can't wait to read about it. What happened with Esau, this 400 men? Let's get into it, chapter 33, Genesis, verse 1. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked. You know that this had to be a challenge to lift up his eyes and look because you could hear him coming, right? It says this, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. 400 men. Now it's a moment of truth. And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto his 2 handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. You notice he put these people in order, right? Well, all right, that's important for later. Verse 3, and he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. That must be a typo. It's supposed to be killed him, right? Fell on his neck and killed him. No! He fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. Brothers reunited. Look at this in verse 5. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are those with thee? And he said, the children with God hath graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaids came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. Verse 7. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? What's the point of all of this? What are you doing? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, this is the first time he gets to really take a breath. I have enough, my brother. Look at that. I have. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. Wow. Can you imagine what was going through Jacob's mind? Let's read on here, verse 10. And Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God had dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. This is amazing. This is the picture of what a family should look like. Today, it's the exact opposite. Instead of I have enough, it's what? I need more, right? That's the exact opposite. You want to get into the ugly, right? Stick around after somebody's funeral, and you'll find the ugly in families. Everybody's always fighting. They want the inheritance. They want the money. They want the good stuff. What can I get? Me. This is a picture of what the family should look like. This is a family brought back together. Man, there's some good stuff here. Let's read on. Verse 11. Let's read on. It says this, and he urged him, and he took it. Verse 12, and he said, let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds are with me. And if men should overdrive them, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord to Seir. Verse 15, and Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. Find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built him a house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called. A lot of stuff going on here. Let's read verses 18, 19, and 20 here real quick. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padanaram, and pitched his tent before the city, and he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it Elohim. So we see a lot going on here. The limping Jacob. He was headed south, anticipating an encounter with his brother. Will Esau receive the gifts? Will he still want to kill Jacob? What is going to happen? All of those problems, which, let's remind everyone, it existed where? In Jacob's mind. That's where all the problems existed. God knew that it wasn't really a problem. And you know what? Esau knew it wasn't really a problem. He knew what he was intending to do. In Jacob's mind, it was a problem. In Jacob's mind, there was all kinds of problems. Listen, there's a lot here for us today. There's a lot here today. How many problems do we create in our mind today? Oftentimes we create problems, we put it in our head. And realistically, in hindsight, we'll look at different issues and things that happened in our past, and we can go through, I know everybody that's in here has a story like this, right? Where you have had problems that you thought were problems, but really God worked them out and they weren't problems after all. Anybody in here have that? I know I have. And the thing is God always works things out. No matter what. He will not leave us. He will not forsake us. He does not abandon us. So there's a lot of amazing things to take from this. All right. Let's go look at a couple questions here before we close here. Peace with God and man. If you have your paperwork, your book, if not, I can get you a copy of this one right here. It's Peace with God and Man. I'll give you guys this for this week if you don't have it, to go home and kind of check some of the stuff. And so we're going to read about how Jacob acknowledges his own sin and its consequences. How does teaching relate to both vertical and horizontal reconciliation? We're going to take a look at Romans chapter 12, talking about our responsibility in reconciling relationships, right? We're not supposed to wrong people and run. And there's questions here. If that is greater than the offenses you have committed against God, and there's a lot of good questions here. So take a look at it this week. If you guys need one of these, I can get you a copy, but it's a good little thing. We'll skip over that here, and we'll get into application. God originally created humans to be relational beings, so to live in a community with one another. Now, how has the fall impacted that original plan? It's a great question. We see that... I lost my notes here. We'll find it here. Okay. All right. So, to live in a community with one another. That's how we originally created, right? God, when he created Adam and then he created Eve, what did he say? He said, it is not good for man to be alone, right? And so we know that it was good for us. So it's important for us to see that that's what we need to have in our lives. We're supposed to have that community. We're supposed to have fellowship. In our study this year, we're talking about not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Why? Church is important. It's important for our fellowship, for our edification, for us to grow. In addition to that, we're also supposed to preach the gospel, right? But the primary function of the church is for us. It's for Christians to grow and to edify and to lift each other up, to share burdens on one another. And so it is for us to grow. This is how we are built. And God keeps things together where it's good for us to be together. So, of course, the fall, we see the exact opposite. And especially today, we can see that this is promoted on a level, it's almost scary today. All right, why? Because 20, 30 years ago, kids still went outside and played. Now they don't have to do that, right? I think we all learned a lesson on COVID, right? COVID, there was things that, people that have been out socializing, example, going to a bank and talking to somebody directly, all that was done, right? You didn't go talk to people directly. In fact, we wanted you to keep away from everybody. The opposite of what God actually intended. God intended us to be, to fellowship with one another. For us Christians, we're supposed to go out into the world and preach the gospel to the world. We're in the world, but not of the world, right? Those are two different things there. But we're also not supposed to just be isolated and in an echo chamber where it's just us and we ignore the world around us. We need to be preaching to those folks. That should be our duty. And so see that now there's been a change. Technology, with cell phones, with all of these things, people are more comfortable doing everything at home, isolated. Isn't that interesting? That's the exact opposite of what God actually planned. But yet we see you can do everything now from home. You can order food, you can have your groceries delivered, and a lot of it, don't get me wrong, is convenient. And I'm saying that it's evil. What I'm saying is we see that is it good for man to develop these skills where you don't have to go out and be with people. You don't have to communicate with people. Is it a good or a bad thing, not socializing with people? Obviously, Matthew 28:19, the first word there is go, right? Not stay. Not call up your neighbor, it's go. Go out into the world. It's a powerful verse when we break it down like that. So, anyways, there's a lot of interesting things to tie in here with some of this stuff. So, God did originally create us to live together, and so there's lots of different ways that sin has impacted this. Today, the same thing's true also if you want to take it into even marriage, right? Today, marriage rates divorce rates are higher among Christians than secular. Why? because most of the secular world's not getting married anymore. They're not even getting married, right? Why get married when you could just live together? That's what people do. And so we see that these relationships that God has designed man for, they are under attack today. Family is under attack today, right? We see that's promoted. Even the government will promote that kind of stuff. Single motherhood is just through the roof. And, it's a shame. All of these kids growing up without fathers in their lives. And we can go on and on and on. You see the idea here. Sin has really gotten into the way of what's good for us in all kinds of different ways here. So why is it important for us to use or to see failures and successes in these pages of Scripture here? In this wisdom, God has shown us the good and bad of the heroes of the past. This allows us to see that those that were used by God are not perfect, giving us hope that even we can be used by God and reconciled to Him despite our own sinful actions. All right, next question here real quick. How does the message of the gospel apply to seeking reconciliation with other people? In Christ, we have been forgiven so much. How can we not forgive others? Man, that's a challenge. Yet for some reason, we still want to hang on to grudges. We still want to hang on to, when people offend us, right? We want to hang on to these things. We want to remember things. Well, we all have problems. Ain't none of us perfect. Ain't none of us arrive. We're going to offend each other. That's going to happen. And so how do we deal with that? Can we forgive? Can we look beyond, look past these different things? We see that we can have hope that God's grace and mercy can break down any walls and restore any relationship, period, hands down. And it may look different afterwards, but that relationship can be reconciled in one way, shape, or form or another. So anyways, one more question here. How have you experienced the change in attitude towards others and towards God, and toward God that Jacob experienced? How have you experienced change in attitude towards God and others, toward God that Jacob experienced? So there's a lot of different interesting ways to answer this. Looking at how God treated Jacob, looking at how even though Jacob was sinful against God, even though Jacob clearly wronged God, he did things the wrong way so many times, God still did not abandon him. And you know what? God even allowed him, taking it a step further, to reconcile his relationships with people that he wronged. It's not even just restored between him and God. He allowed Jacob to restore those other relationships too. That's how good God is. That's how amazing God is. So, this is a question for everybody to take home. There's no answer for this one, obviously. But the question that we all need to ask is, are there any specific relationships in which we need to seek reconciliation? And that is always tough. Digging down family members, old friends, loved ones, is there somebody out there that we need to restore a relationship with of some kind? A lot that we can learn from Jacob. We can learn a lot from his story. We can learn a lot from Esau, how he reacted. We can learn so much from all of this passage. So I know that we kind of skipped through some of this stuff kind of quick, but I hope it wasn't too broad. Everybody kind of got the point of what we're trying to grasp here. Relationships are important. We should be those. And running from our problems obviously never works out. So, all right, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and close out this evening. We're going to stand and sing our closing song here. It's one of my favorite hymns, Blessed Assurance. We're going to sing that. If you have business with God, you know the drill. This is your time. You can come, stay in your seats, whatever you want to do there. Sing along with us, and then we're going to close out this evening here. Blessed Assurance.